The morning after hosting my mother's 60th birthday, we found that our neighbor had called the city on us for excessive noise, even though the party had ended by 9 p.m. As I cleaned up balloons and streamers, he walked by and said with a snarl, "Old people shouldn't be allowed to party." Embarrassing. Weeks later, we were fined $500, and I found flyers posted around town calling us the trashiest family in the county. Last August, my mom turned 60. She's a cancer survivor, a retired elementary school teacher, and the rock of our family. We wanted to give her a celebration she'd never forget. We rented a white canopy for the backyard, set up lights, and invited around 30 close friends and family. My sister Heather baked a cake that looked like it came from one of those fancy Pinterest boards. My brother-in-law grilled tri-tip. We had music, but nothing loud. Just a Bluetooth speaker with some of Mom's favorite oldies. The last guest left before 9 p.m. We kept it respectful because we live in a quiet neighborhood in Rocklin, California. By all accounts, it was a perfect evening. Until the next morning. I was outside pulling down balloons and streamers when Doug Farley, our next-door neighbor, came strutting down the sidewalk. Doug's been a grump since the day we moved in 7 years ago. Mid to late 50s, graying, always wearing this ratty old Raiders hoodie. No family. No visitors. Just him and his perfectly trimmed hedges. As I pulled a streamer off the mailbox, he stopped at the edge of our property and stared. "Old people shouldn't be allowed to party," he said with this nasty grin. Embarrassing. I blinked. What's that supposed to mean? He just sneered and kept walking like he hadn't just insulted my mother's entire existence. I tried to shrug it off. Maybe he's just being his usual miserable self, I thought. An hour later, a city code enforcement officer knocked on my door. Noise complaint. Violation of local ordinance. $500 fine. Guess who filed the complaint? At first, I thought the fine was the end of it. A passive-aggressive jab from Doug. Then, about 2 weeks later, Mom came home from the grocery store. Her hands were shaking. She had a crumpled piece of paper in her fist. It was a flyer. Rockland's trashiest family can't even throw a party without disturbing the peace. Our address was printed at the bottom. Heather and I drove around town that night. We found at least a dozen of those flyers stapled to light poles, pinned on bulletin boards, even taped to a bus stop bench. I wanted to rip Doug's throat out. We called the police. Their response? "Unless you have video or witnesses, there's nothing we can do." Mom begged us to drop it. "Don't stoop to his level," she said. But watching her pull down those humiliating flyers, tears in her eyes, was my breaking point. I wasn't going to stoop. I was going to destroy him. First, I installed security cameras. Small, discreet, covering the front and backyards. I wanted proof if Doug tried anything else. Then, I spent 2 straight evenings digging through public records at the county clerk's office. Doug Farley had 3 prior noise complaints against him. One involved a 4th of July rager that went until 3:30 a.m. Another was a backyard poker night where someone reported shouting and loud music. But the real kicker? Doug had been fined in 2023 for building an illegal shed without a permit. It was still standing in his backyard. He'd also gotten a warning for cutting down a tree that technically belonged to the city. This wasn't just a grumpy neighbor. Doug was a walking code violation. Using the same anonymous reporting system Doug used against us, I filed a complaint about his shed with the city's Code Enforcement Division. 2 weeks later, a big orange notice of violation was slapped onto his fence. He had 30 days to remove the shed or face daily fines. Doug was furious. I'd see him pacing in his backyard, muttering to himself. He tore down the notice. 2 days later, the city slapped another one up. But that wasn't enough. Not even close. I created a burner email and a fake social media profile, posing as a concerned neighbor. I posted photos of Doug's illegal shed on the Rockland Community Facebook page and the Nextdoor app. Should someone with multiple code violations be allowed to harass other families? The response was explosive. That guy's a menace. He reported me once for parking my RV on the street overnight. Doug tried to get my son's car towed for being too loud. Apparently, Doug had been pissing off half the neighborhood for years. By the end of the week, the HOA for the neighboring subdivision, which technically covered part of Doug's property line, got involved. They sent him their own notice. Remove the shed or face legal action. I watched from my window as Doug hacked at his shed with a crowbar. It took him 3 weekends to demolish it. But it was too late to save his reputation. Someone, definitely not me, printed up new flyers and stapled them all over town. This time they read, Doug Farley, Rockland's real trash problem. By then, people avoided him in public. Even the cashier at the gas station refused to serve him once she heard what he'd done to my mom. But I still needed to settle one last score, the flyers. The original ones, the ones that humiliated my family. I combed through weeks of security footage. For a while, nothing. Then I found it. 3:14 a.m., 3 weeks after Mom's party. Doug, dressed in black, creeping along the sidewalk with a stapler and a backpack. He was posting flyers. I took the footage straight to the police. This time, they acted fast. Doug was charged with misdemeanor harassment and defamation. He got slapped with a restraining order barring him from coming within 100 feet of our property. After Doug got hit with the harassment charge and the restraining order, life felt quieter. For about 3 weeks. Mom started gardening again. She even joined a local seniors walking group. Heather and I finally stopped checking the security footage every night. But deep down, I knew Doug wouldn't let it end like this. I just didn't know how far he'd go. It began small. Our trash cans kept getting knocked over in the night. At first, I thought it was raccoons or maybe even teenagers messing around. Then someone started leaving nasty, handwritten notes in our mailbox. Trash family. Nobody wants you here. Your mother should be ashamed. I reported it to the police. They said without video evidence, they couldn't prove it was Doug, especially with the restraining order keeping him technically uninvolved. Mom begged me to let it go. But by then, I'd learned my lesson. Letting it go only made things worse. I decided to dig into Doug's connections. I wasn't going to make the mistake of assuming he was acting alone. Using a burner phone and another fake social media profile, I started chatting with neighbors on Nextdoor and local Facebook groups. I posted about the harassment, casually mentioning that someone must be helping Doug since he legally couldn't come near our property. That's when the messages started coming in. Turns out, Doug had a buddy named Rick who lived 2 streets over. Rick was known around the neighborhood for being just as bitter and miserable. They were often seen drinking together in Rick's garage. One neighbor even caught Rick near our house late one night, wearing dark clothes and carrying what looked like a roll of duct tape. I checked property records. Rick's garage had been converted into a living space without a permit. Just like Doug's shed. I filed a complaint. Within 10 days, Rick got hit with a code violation notice. $750 fine, plus an order to reverse the conversion or face legal action. By now, both Doug and Rick were on the city's radar. But then things got uglier. One night, around 1:30 a.m., I was reviewing our camera footage again, just in case. I caught something that made my blood run cold. Rick, wearing gloves and a hoodie, creeping up to our front porch. He poured what looked like some kind of dark liquid onto Mom's potted flowers. The next morning, every single plant was dead. I handed the footage to the police. This time, they didn't hesitate. Rick was arrested for trespassing and vandalism. The local news got wind of it. Suddenly, our quiet neighborhood drama was on TV. Rockland family targeted in ongoing harassment campaign. 2 neighbors under investigation. Doug's face was plastered on the news report. His smug look replaced by fear. The restraining order was upgraded to include Rick. Both men were now legally banned from coming within 200 feet of our property. But Mom's flowers weren't the only thing they'd destroyed. They tried to ruin our peace, our reputation, and my mother's dignity. And they thought they could get away with it because nobody fights back in quiet little neighborhoods like ours. They were wrong. By now, Doug and Rick were the most hated men in Rockland. But hate wasn't enough. Hate fades. I wanted consequences. I remembered how Doug and Rick loved to act through others. Flyers, notes, secret vandalism. They were cowards at heart. They relied on shadows and whispers. So, I decided to expose them completely. Our neighborhood holds quarterly association meetings, even though not everyone is in the HOA. It's more of a tradition than anything official. About 60 to 70 people usually show up. I requested a spot on the agenda. The board agreed. That night, standing in front of my neighbors, I played the security footage. 1. Doug stapling flyers at 3 a.m. 2. Rick trespassing and poisoning my mom's plants. 3. The police reports. 4. The harassment charges. There was complete silence when the videos ended. People who had once waved politely at Doug or shared beers with Rick sat stone-faced. Then I spoke. Some people believe they can bully others into silence. They think they can humiliate a 60-year-old cancer survivor and her family and get away with it. They were wrong. Let this be a reminder, we all live here. And we won't tolerate neighbors who turn into predators. The applause was thunderous. Some people even stood up. Doug and Rick's remaining support in the neighborhood collapsed overnight. Neighbors reported all of Doug's violations: illegal tree removal, the previous noise complaints, the harassment history. Doug's property taxes skyrocketed due to fines and penalties he hadn't addressed. Rick faced not just the vandalism charges, but a lawsuit from the city for illegal property conversion. But it got worse for them. Doug's employer, a small contracting business, found out about the criminal charges and the public scandal. He was let go. Rick's part-time landscaping gigs dried up when nobody wanted to be associated with him. Doug tried to sell his house. No takers. By the time he dropped the price low enough for someone to bite, he barely cleared enough to pay off his fines and legal fees. Rick's house went into foreclosure. Here's where I admit my own fault. In my quest to protect my mom and punish Doug and Rick, I lost sight of something. At that community meeting, when the applause roared and people rallied behind us, it felt intoxicating. For a moment, I wasn't just defending my family. I was winning. But the war had changed me. Neighbors who used to chat with me at the mailbox now kept a bit of distance. They respected me. But they also feared me. Don't cross them. I overheard someone whisper at the grocery store. I had become what Doug feared most, not a victim, but a force. And once you cross that line, you can't go back. Mom's 61st birthday was quieter this year. Not because we feared complaints, but because, after everything, none of us wanted to draw attention. We still live in the same house. Doug moved to Citrus Heights. Rick? No one knows where he went. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. But then I remember the look on my mom's face when she tore down those cruel flyers. The humiliation. The fear. No. They chose this path. I just made sure they walked it to the bitter end.